Tak ada Doktor.
No.
Okay, so kalau macam tu, we start with today's class lah terus. So by right, hopefully we would complete the topic by today. So it's a very simple topic. Okay. Okay, so let's begin our class for today. So if you can still recall, we stopped our class yesterday at this slide. Okay, so the role of the project manager during closure. I tak bawa my, okay, never mind. I think we can just continue. Okay, so for planning, okay, so planning for project closure, basically there are several closure issues that should be addressed as you initially define and structure your project. Okay, so acceptance criteria. So what it means is basically these are the things, I think I'll just put in this form. Okay, so these are the things that you need to actually highlight, or you need to actually gather from the client. Okay, what is considered acceptance criteria by the client? Alright, so this one relates back to project definition. Okay, so what is being defined as deliverables? Okay, so what is being expected as the by the end user, and what project deliverables are accepted or rejected. But for construction, basically from project definition, we move on to design, and then we move on to project contract. So actually we are binded by the contract, so which is fine as long as you follow the contract. But let's say there are any projects which might not have contract, for example, then it will go back to the project definition stage, the project charter. So meaning to say that whatever we crafted from the project, whatever we crafted at the contract, it goes back to project definition. So hence it starts at the very beginning of the project, which is at the project definition stage, to actually highlight what are the acceptance criteria, what are the things being required. Cuma for us, in a very much detailed manner, we refer to the contract document. Okay, so if we comply to the contract document, to the drawing, to the specification required, then it shouldn't be a problem for us. So for us, moving on daripada project definition is the contract document that highlights what is being required and basically accepted by the client. Okay, so without the acceptance criteria, you cannot close the project, because if you do not have any proper guidance or saying that, okay, once you complete architectural work with the planning, everything documented, every of the project activities are being addressed, then it will be accepted. Okay, but without that, it is quite difficult. So how do we know where to stop? But for us, it's pretty straightforward. Maybe there are certain projects which are quite vague, for example, especially if you're talking about simple, for example, you are trying to how to say, come up with a website. Okay, so website can be vague to a certain extent. Okay, so maybe the requirement would simply mean a pleasant viewing website. So those are the things which are quite vague, and if tak ada proper acceptance criteria, then probably the client might not be accepting the website at all. Okay, so for us, it's pretty straightforward for construction. Okay. Alright, so the next closure kickoff timing. Okay, so typically project closure activities should begin when project deliverables are near completion. More or less, I would say 90%. Okay, it depends on the project. So maybe if it's a very complex project, you might want to start off the project closure activities maybe 80-85%, maybe. But if it's a very reasonably simple project, then maybe 90-95% of the progress, then you can start off your project closure activities. Okay, so the goal is to ensure no valuable time is wasted. once we go on to the activities, you will see that there are certain things you need to carry out earlier. Okay, so for example, any inspection, any checking that could be done when you have actually installed the facility, then it could be done at 90% completion. So um, certain areas that you can actually inspect earlier. So tak perlulah tunggu 100% complete, then you call in the inspector to check. Dia lambat lah. Okay, so the goal is to ensure that once you almost complete, you can actually carry out the inspection activities and so on, testing, commissioning and so on. Okay, so once the project nears completion, so your transition should begin immediately, so to maintain the momentum, okay, and to ensure that there are sufficient resources available. So because if you do not conduct a proper project closure, it's quite difficult for you to see what activities are remaining and what are the resources you require to move forward with that. Okay. And transition needs. Okay, so as you plan for closure, you need to consider the transition requirements. Okay, relate to the status of project. So when a project is under development, the project team is under control. But when your deliverable is almost ready, you almost complete your construction, you need to transition it to the end user. Okay, and also operation staff. It depends what you are constructing. If you are constructing a single house, the client is the end user, then you will pass on the house to the end user. However, let's say you are constructing it for a certain developer, so you will pass on to the developer. So developer would actually pass it on to the end user. Okay, so the transition is whether you are giving it to the end user or whether you are giving it to the client transit. Okay, so the movement from during production, and then you pass on the key and whatsoever to the end user. Okay, and of course, if you're talking about complex project, okay, so such as hospital, your transition does not only refer to the client, it refers also to the end user yang macam doctors and nurses and so on, because it involves a lot of M&E equipment, it involves a lot of health equipment and so on. So the transition period will take quite a while. Okay, so you need to provide training and so on. But of course, you are just the facilitator that, I mean, you are not the person who's going to train. But because the installation of equipment has been done by yourself, there should be a certain program that actually transit how the movement of the equipment being transited to the end user, let's say doctor, nurses and so on. Okay, so turnover, okay, so basically involve end user training, operation training if you're talking about facilities in manufacturing area. Okay, so for example, boiler, okay, or factories. So those are the equipment that you need to at least have this transition period of training provided, because you are the installer for that. Okay, so there should be a correspondence between you and then the manufacturer, okay, as well as the person is going to use the boiler and whatsoever. Okay, so operation training and any preparation of procedure, technical document. Okay, next, while you are planning for this, you need to plan for the resources, you need to plan for the roles, you need to plan for the responsibility. Okay, so during this period, what type of resources do you still require? Okay, so at the end of the day, you might only require one engineer. Okay, so you might not, or even some small projects, you might not even require an engineer. You might just place a site supervisor just to ensure the finalizing activities are completed. Okay, so that depends on you as a project manager. What type of resources do you still require? In terms of workers, maybe you are left with a little bit of landscaping, a little bit of touch up, those are the things. Okay, and who will be involved? Okay, so this is what I mentioned just now. Management, are there any project managers, or are there any engineers or site supervisors? And will the end user be involved? Okay, so if you're talking about, as I mentioned, hospital, maybe your end user will be involved at this stage. factory, maybe your end user will be involved. But if you're talking about just a residential area where you just need to provide the key, then tak adalah training or whatever is going to happen in between. So it'll be just a simple transition. Okay. So as the project draws to a close, okay, how will the project team members be reassigned? So this is where you have to see where would you expect your project engineer to be. Okay, so another project. So this is where you have a constraint. If you are owner of a construction company, so this is where you might want to see, you need to have another project so that your workers would have project to go on with. If no, dia stop kat sana je lah. Okay, so you might not be having another, you might not be assigning them to another project. And who will be involved in the post-project review process? Okay, so the post-mortem. Okay, so usually it will be involving the manager, engineer, the client. Okay, and in terms of communication, how do you plan the communication? Biasanya we have meetings. Okay, so to ensure smooth closure transition, communication is important. So will you have any closure planning meeting? Okay, so how often do you want to have the closure closure meeting? And what type of document required for you to ensure effective project closure? So your project closure shouldn't be only verbal, there should be a written form as well. Okay, so because when you're talking about communication, you can communicate through verbal, you can communicate through written. Okay, so both ways it should be done as well. Okay, and then next, perform project closure. Okay, so basically project closure involve more or less all of this. Okay, so you need to determine whether all project completion criteria have been met. Meaning to say that you need to check back the contract document, the drawing, the specification, the activities in the Gantt chart, ensuring all activities has been done and complied to. Okay, and to identify any outstanding activities. Okay, so any risks or any issues that you need to probably highlight to the end user or to the client. So you might have completed all of this, tapi ada tak risk that you actually outstanding that you think you need to inform the client? Okay, and handing over all project deliverables documentation to the customer. Alright, so this one is very important if you're talking about installing a lot of equipment and facilities. So the warranty document, okay, and also as-built drawing, so it should be given to the client, because if the client only have the the original drawing without the as-built drawing, so it might not be aligned. So because the original and as-built would be different. Okay, so sometimes they positioning of the wall slightly deviated, and then especially crucial if you're talking about underground activities or underground services. So because especially if you are placing the electrical cable, so you need to make sure that the drawing, original drawing and as-built, what are the difference, so that when you hand over to TNB, they know exactly where you have actually embedded the cable. So rather than the original, mungkin you dah deviate a few meters. So when they're trying to excavate, they ter-excavate yang, so at a different position. So it's quite dangerous. So especially if you're talking about underground that you cannot see, you cannot view. Okay, so the documentations. You need to cancel supplier contracts, release the resources to the business, okay, communicate closure to all stakeholders, okay, and interested parties. So the activities of project closures more or less are summed here. Okay, so the first one is basically commissioning. So commissioning is basically to ensure whatever facility that you have actually installed, it is working well. Okay, so you need to have startup, you need to trial run it, especially kalau if you look into newly built hospital, the trial run period is very long. Okay, so just to ensure everything is running smoothly. Okay, so their numbering system, all of that needs to be checked to ensure that once you have the patient coming in, the systems are running really well. Okay, so airport, so the trial will take quite a while for those kind of facility. Okay, so airport, you have your passengers coming in, so the door should be working well and so on. So startup and trial basically. Okay, so very important. But if you're talking about just residential houses, just to make sure the aircon is working well, water, plumbing, flush, so those are the things that you need to ensure that those are in compliance. Okay, so the main objective, why do you need this? To ensure that the performance is as predicted. For example, your aircon is working well. Okay, so it can go especially in what do we call it, in surgery room. Okay, so where they conduct surgery, so the aircon is, you know, should be in tip top condition, so because it is usually in a very low temperature situation. Okay, so performance is well, test, check and search for any hazard. Okay, so particularly if there are any electrical elements involved. Okay, so this is where you conduct commissioning. So if you start your project closure after everything have been completed, painting cantik 100%, baru nak check, lambat lah. Okay, so you can actually start checking on the facilities that you have installed, maybe 80 to 90% of the progress of the entire project. Okay, so because you have installed it, so mungkin the last 10% is only all these touch-up works. Okay, so a little bit of painting here and there. Okay, next you need to correct the design, right? So this is where I've mentioned you need to have the as-built drawing. So because your original drawing might not be the when you construct, it would not or might not be exactly the same as the original drawing. So hence, when you pass on to the client, you need to provide a drawing that resembles exactly what you built physically. Okay, so whatever they built on site, it should be physically represented in the drawing, especially underground services. Okay, sewer line, water. Okay, so the plumbing for water, and also electricity. Okay, so whatever embedded underground, so that should be properly highlighted before you pass it on to the proper authority. Okay, and then personnel training is where I've mentioned just now, if you're talking about facility which require training. Okay, so hospital that I can think of, factories. Okay, so operation, maintenance of facility, how to operate, how to maintain the facility, and these are where technical support is required. Okay, so this is where, for example, you will need to train, you will need to provide the proper knowledge to the person who's going to handle that. Okay, and next will be issuing of certificate. So this one I need to write here. CF. Okay, so you might have heard of CF, Certificate of Fitness, CCC. Okay, so at the end of your project, how do we know we are, it is certified for us, it is safe enough for us to stay? Either you might acquire the CF, Certificate of Fitness, or CCC, Certificate of Completion and Compliance. So it is similar, except that certificate of fitness is usually for a certain particular project of what do you call, big higher capital. Okay, so for a normal residential houses, CCC is sufficient. Okay, when we are talking about CF, Certificate of Fitness, you will need the support letter by the technical agencies. Okay, so for certificate of fitness, you will need support letter by technical agencies. Okay, for example, such as the fire department. Meaning to say that once you have completed a project, okay, so let's say CF, let's say you're talking about factory area, okay, so you have completed, and before you can actually hand over to the client, you need to get the CF. In order to get the CF, okay, so CF is released by local council. Okay, Majlis Perbandaran or Majlis Bandaraya or Majlis Daerah. So those are local council. So the local council would release the certificate of fitness after gaining the support letter by the technical agencies. Okay, so Jabatan Saliran, for example, TNB, Electric, and also JKR, Fire. Okay, so the support letter can only be given after inspection done by them. Okay, so meaning to say that if you have 16 agencies involved that require their what you call approval, you need to get them on the site, check on it, check on the doors. Okay, so your fire resistant door, betul ke you install fire resistant door, and then the parapet. Okay, so those are the things that might be checked. Okay, they have their own checklist. But once you get their approval, okay, so once upon checking, okay, you have complied to all the requirements set by the technical agencies, a support letter will be given by each one of the technical agencies. And once you get that, baru you boleh dapat the CF. Okay, so you can imagine that it will take quite a while. Okay, so it takes quite a while, especially if you're talking about just a simple house. So if you're talking about a simple house, but to get them, each one of the agency to come in, it takes a lot of time. So hence CCC ni keluar. Okay, so CCC has been established. I think around 1990 something lah. Okay, or around 2000 something, 1990 something. Okay, so whereby there are a lot of complaints from developer stating that lambat untuk dapat CF. Prior to CCC ni, all the projects would require CF. So because there are a lot of complaints and there are shortages of technical team yang to conduct the inspection, so lambat lah. So hence the government actually came up with CCC. Okay, so CCC is granted for projects of a smaller scale. Residential houses would only apply, would only require CCC. So the difference between CF and CCC, so the inspection for CCC is done by the superintending officer, SO. Okay, so for a typical construction project in Malaysia, for residential, for example, your SO will be the architect. Okay, so if it's a typical project, okay, whereby the head is usually the architect. But if you're talking about civil oriented project, okay, so any road project, for example, or any bridge project which is purely on structural, so maybe your superintending officer will be the engineer. But a typical township project whatsoever usually comes under the architect. So it is the architect's job to conduct the inspection. So there would be a checklist for them to conduct. So they need to check on that and give their approval. Once the approval has been given, pass on to the local authority, then you'll be able to get the CCC. Okay, so the difference is as such. So usually it will take a shorter period of time because it's kind of like an in-house checking, and CF is by the agencies. Okay, so once you get the completion certificate, okay, so the basically it will pass on to the your defect liability period. Okay, your defect liability period starts. The warranty lah. Okay, so defect liability period. So defect liability period is like a warranty. Okay, usually is for 1 year. Okay, so once you have the certificate, so it's like a warranty. You dah beli barang, then your warranty starts from the time you actually receive the barang for 1 year. So something like that. Okay, so for similar to this, so the defect liability period starts, and if there are any kerosakan, if there are any damages, workmanship issue, um, hairline crack, for example, so it would be mentioned to the contractor, and contractor will come in to rectify it. Okay, so this is where inilah remedial activity begins. So probably I'll just put it here. Okay, so the remedial work begins if there are any issues with what do you call it, workmanship and so on. Okay, the contractor would need to come and do it. Why? Because they still have the retention sum with the client. Okay, so more or less around 5%. So it's like you still pegang the contractor lah. Okay, so until the defect liability period completes. Okay, all right, so next thing in terms of the activities are basically preparing the documentation. Okay, so you might prepare the maintenance manual. Okay, so mentioning to the client in terms of maintenance operation. So the maintenance manual usually comes from the what they call the supplier. Not that you have to do the maintenance manual, but at least you have this apa, this maintenance manual, warranty, and so all of that such thing. So this should be given to the client, and they are aware that the equipment needs to be maintained as such, as such, as such. Okay, and then you have the record drawing, so SB drawing. So this is what I mentioned just now. You need to prepare this record drawing, the SB drawing, the changes. Okay, so you need to mention clearly what are the changes and also any variations. Okay, and purchase equipment record. So you need to provide, the vendor should provide the technical backup. Okay, so as a contractor you might install it, but you are not the vendor. Okay, so if any facility, any equipment, it goes back to the vendor. So it should come with all of this. But as the installer, or as the person who is basically in charge of ensuring that the equipment is installed and so on, you need to make sure that the specifications, certification semua tu lulus dan ada lah. Okay, and the next thing you need to have is the correspondence. Okay, so proper storage of legal correspondence. This is very, very, very important. Okay, why? You wouldn't know if you have problem 10 years to come. Okay, so if you have any damage to the building, if the building collapse ke, partial collapse ke, this is where you need to have that backup. So legal correspondence are basically, for example, RFI. Okay, so for example, request for information. So this is where, for example, as a contractor, if there are certain discrepancy in the drawing, okay, so if there are certain ambiguity in the drawing, you might want to get information or further information from the consultant. Yes, nowadays we kind of like WhatsApp and call cepat kan, but you need to have black and white as well. If you have made changes on the site based on verbal, tapi after 10 years something happened, who is going to be blamed? It will be on you, because you have made the changes without having proper information given by the consultant. So this one applicable in your daily life juga. Okay, especially when you start working. So any changes, any item that you think it could affect you in terms of your job, okay, you have received instruction by your boss, for example, okay, make sure that it is also in a documented form. Because if there is anything, if it's just verbal and you just make the changes, and one fine day your boss say he did not mention that, then you will be in trouble. Okay, so it applies to whether you are in a construction, very important. That's why you have a site clerk. So that's why usually any site pun you have a site clerk, because the site clerk documents the receiving document, for example design, and also any um, outgoing document, okay, any outgoing information, such as you need the request for information, so they are the in and also out. So very important that you keep that properly documented and the site clerk properly doing the job. So other than that, in terms of your work as let's say you're an engineer, make sure you are very careful with whatever decision you make, or whatever instruction you are giving, or instruction sometimes giving as well, because sometimes you give the instruction verbally tapi your supervisor tak follow and something happen, so it doesn't go to your supervisor, it goes back to you. So um really it depends, you, unless you have a very good support team and you can 100% trust them, but trust me, nowadays in working life you really cannot trust people 100%. Okay, so sometimes you have your clerk and so on, you just need to double check the work and so on, just as a backup, because sometimes they might report something wrongly and it goes back to you. Okay, so especially if you're a project manager, anything, your subordinate buat salah ke, your subordinate did not listen or did not comply, it goes back to you. Okay, so you will be responsible. So that's why the job as project manager, project is one part of it. Okay, so the progress is one part of it, but the liability, the stress of handling the people to ensure that the people are listening to you and make sure that progress is also on dot, it is on you. So sebenarnya the higher you go in any job, okay, so the higher you go, the it might look easy, but the higher your responsibility would be. Okay, so you might not be doing practically doing the work, but to have that trust on someone to do it is much more harder. So to instruct and so on. Okay, all right. Okay, next activities of project closure, you need to finalize financial matters. Okay, so final cert is issued. Okay, so once the retention sum period has been over, so you need to make sure payment is given, so to contractors, subcontractors, suppliers, semua tu being given lah. So final certificate of financial is issued, independent contractors are being paid, project team report. Okay, so this is where sometimes, or I've mentioned, people do not do it that much. Okay, so reporting ni, so what are the difficulties that you identify on the current site, and what are the lesson learned for future. So sometimes kita dah habis, then we just okay move on, so we go on to the next project without having a proper reflection on the current project, because sometimes your issue might be the same, tapi when you go on to the new project, you dah lupa dah masalah sini, whereas you are actually going through the same similar problem, tapi you dah tak ingat how you actually solve it, so you go on the same cycle again if you come into the project with that problem. What if you did not encounter your subordinate encounter? So if you have everything properly reported and disseminated to everyone, so everyone would know what are the difficulties, everyone would know what they need to learn for future. So benda tu is more like knowledge dissemination, or knowledge management and dissemination within the organization. Okay. All right, so the next one is basically disposal of your stuff. Okay, so when you are disposing them off, okay, so you need to how to handle them. Okay, so you need to ensure they are still motivated. So for example, your current project in Klang Valley, but your next project that you're going to deploy them will be Sarawak. So how are you going to get, are they okay, you know, because sometimes yelah, sometimes well, you can say that, you know, you're being paid to do that, but to keep people motivated too. So how do you get them motivated? So probably their families here, and to go on to, you know, the other side of the world will be challenging. So this is where, as a project manager, is the people part of the role is important lah too. Okay, so keep your staff fully informed. So this is also important because people don't like to be kept under shadow macam tu. So under in black. So you like tahu tapi tak tahu. So it's best to actually be transparent, and the staff would appreciate that very well. Okay, so sometimes rather than you dodging around macam tahu tapi tak boleh bagi tahu. So something like that lah. Okay. Alright, so the next part of it basically a project closure report. Okay, so it's documented, submitted to the customer or the project sponsor. The word is the same. Okay, so customer, project sponsor, client, funder. Yesterday I used the word donor. Is more or less the same people. Okay, so the people who actually funded your project too. Okay, so for approval. So the project manager is responsible to undertake each of the activities in the project closure. Okay, so the ones we have mentioned earlier, certification sort of things. Okay, so and the project is closed only when all activities in the report have been completed. So you have like a checklist lah kat sini. Okay, so and you have to plan because you have different activities here. Okay, so one might involve inviting technical agencies. You might also come up with a drawing. You might also come up with training. So you have a lot that you need to actually juggle around towards the project closure. Dia nampak okay, project closure pretty straightforward, simple. But if you look into the activities, there are a lot. Okay, so quite a lot that you need to juggle around. So you need to make sure all of this checklist has been completed. Then then you can actually complete the entire project closure report. Okay, so to ensure that everything has been done. Next, you review project completion. Okay, so following the closure, you review the success. Okay, so during the post-mortem. Okay, so we call it post-implementation review. So this is where you highlight the ups, you highlight the downs, and basically how have you achieved the project success ke tak ke. So if you overrun the time, for how long, overrun the budget, for how much, and so on. Okay, so this review helps you to determine whether the project delivered the business benefit. Okay, does it meet the customer's requirement, and does it remain within the project scope and budget. Okay, so whether you have achieved all of that requirement. Okay, and this is where there are several questions you may ask during the post-mortem. Okay, so or during the review project completion meeting. So did the delivered project meet the project requirement? Okay, so was it within the time frame? Was it within the schedule here? Was it within the budget? Or if there are other what they call criteria for achieving success, for example, environmental pollution, safety and health, how many accidents you have actually encountered. Okay, so was the customer satisfied? Okay, so any risk identified, mitigated, and what could be done to improve the process. So basically, when you are conducting any post-mortem, doesn't matter construction or anything, typically we will go back to this kind of question. Okay, so that you can close up the project. If there are any issues, this is where it should be highlighted. Okay, and the output from the project closure. Okay, so from the phase, basically it is as a stepping stone to execute next project, which with much more efficiency and also control. Okay, so the idea of having all of this highlighted is so that it helps you in your next project and so on. Okay, and that will be the end for project closure. Okay, so we have around 5 more minutes. Maybe we open up to the class. Any question do you want to ask on project closure ni? No question? Because the topic is too easy ke apa ni?
Tak juga, doktor.
Tak juga. So any other question? This topic will be in their second test lah, basically.
Okay, doctor.
Okay, so if there are no other question, probably we can end the class kat sini lah kot. Okay, so if I think yesterday's video I belum retrieve lagi. Okay, so I'll retrieve yesterday's and today's video. So I'll upload it. So if you have any queries on that, hold on let me just see. Okay, so if you have any queries on that, please ask me in the next class. So next class we will touch a little bit on the responsibility of a project manager. I think that would take you only the Monday kot, and then we might come go on to revision sikit before we end the course for the semester. Okay, all right. Any question?
So far, no.
Okay, so if there are none, then you have a good rest after this and take care of yourself. Okay, so I'll see you next Monday. Okay, thank you very much for attending the class.
Thank you, doctor.
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 Thank you,
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you,
Okay.
doctor. Have a good day, doctor.
You too.
Thank you, doctor.